So good afternoon. We're at the final afternoon of the JSN colloquium here at Loyola University Chicago, and we just had a wonderful presentation by the president of the North American Conference, Father Tim Kosicki, and he spoke to us about the importance of discerning the mission of Jesuit education. So I'm joined by Judy Alessandri, Learning Specialist and Student Disability Coordinator at Bellarmine Prep. So Judy, for those who weren't at the presentation, would you like to share some of your reflections and what stood out for you at the presentation?
Yeah, I thought it was excellent, by the way. It was an excellent presentation. It was very comprehensive. A lot of things stood out to me. I think just from a general, one of the first things that stood out to me, he shared a statistic about Catholic identity and about when students or young people start losing their Catholic identity. And I think a lot of people in the room were very surprised to see that it was during that prime time that we have students in our schools, that 13 to 17, I think that they said that the average was at 13.
Right, yeah.
Which kind of really surprised me.
Yeah.
So it did prompt the thinking about why. Right? When you see that statistic and you think about all that we do in the context of our schools and what we try to lead students to, what is happening with that, right? Or even at age 13, that means they're coming into our high school.
Right.
With already on the ebbing in their Catholic identity. So made me think, what could we do programmatically to turn that around? How can we get students excited rather than, essentially their identity when they're younger than that is through their parents. So this is the point of their time when they're starting to separate from their parents. Their peers are becoming more important. Yeah, and how can we take the opportunity of this kind of change in their social dynamic, but to increase to turn that tide where you can still have that Catholic identity and growth in the context of you growing as a person and developing into adulthood. So to me, right away, that was a statistic that was shown, and it prompted my brain just moving and moving and moving. Yeah. I think after that, what stood out to me was the concept of lights and shadows.
Yeah.
So he was proposing the discernment process, and what that prompted me to think was, so often in education especially, we're so used to the right and wrong answer. We're used to the limits, right? These are the 3 things you need to know. These are the 4 questions that'll be on the test, right? We're often very limit driven in how we do education. And what I loved about the way that he framed the discernment process was, rather than saying these are the good things, these are bad things, we're so kind of used to that. When he proposed things like the 4 different topics, and he separated it essentially into lightness and
shadows.
And shadows.
Yeah.
I want to say darkness, but it was shadow, which is a much better word, by the way. Shadows is a much better word than darkness.
Yeah.
What I loved about how he did that was that it allowed space for deeper discernment.
Yeah.
Because you're not just trying to say, what are these 3 things? What are these 5 things that we could do better? But discerning at a deeper level by having it more thematic, maybe more conceptual, and what that could mean for each school. It leaves it really open as each school kind of looks at their environment through that discernment process. What applies to them? Where are their shadows? Where are their lights? And how can they address the shadows and change the culture of the school, the culture of the educational process, or whatever it is, especially as we're looking again back to the context of growing young men and women to be young people of conscience, men and women for others, and all the adherence to the mission of Jesuit education. So I love that framing of allowing so much deeper and more thoughtful and mindful examination of what we're doing, rather than just trying to go for the quick fix.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a long-term thing. It's not like, okay, this year we're going to do lightness and shadows. What are we doing next year? Oh, the WAS is coming in, or the WCA. What are we going to do then, right? So to me, this was something you could use long-term. This is not just okay, the next 2 years we're going to talk about lightness and shadows, and then it's out the door. So I really like that aspect of it as well. Yeah. So those are, I think, my biggest kind of takeaways.
And what about if there's something that you'll take back to your work from either from Tim's presentation or from the colloquium in general?
Well, the colloquium in general, I have an interesting job title, which you said. Not all schools have a learning specialist. Not all schools have supports and really clear adjustments for students that learn differently. And it's not. And what I love about the Jesuit education in general is the opportunity to look as people, right? I'm kind of bristle when I think about special. I don't want to think about special services. Everybody needs stuff.
Yeah.
Everybody has stuff. Do you ever use the wheelchair ramp when you walk into a building? Well, yeah, you do. It's there for handicapped people, but do you have a stroller? Do you have a bad knee that day? What about if somebody said, well, that's not for you, right? So we all have times when we've needed a helping hand or an adjustment or something. You're left-handed, you sit at the end of the table. So nobody says, well, you can't sit at the end of the table. I sat you over here. And we have choice as adults. But so for me, taking back all the things, how can I make the educators at my school come to see students, as individuals, with promise and gifts and limitations, because honestly, everyone has them.
Right.
Some of them are more acceptable. I wear glasses. We don't consider that special, but if I didn't have them, I couldn't read. I couldn't drive. So it is an adjustment, but because it's commonplace, we don't think, oh, she's special, she wears glasses.
Right.
But yet when we look at some issues like dyslexia, we go, well, that's special, you know, and it's really not. Like, we all have stuff. We all have things that are, so for me, I could see how that could all feed into the lights and shadows. Like, what are the shadows of how we work with students, or say that we can't.
Yeah.
You know, they can't come here, or maybe they can, but they just need to work really hard, or, you know, our teachers, they may not be able to do well with, you know. So that's my mission going forward. How can I improve not only the educational environment for my students, but how can I make teachers feel more, I think part of that is fear on their part, right?
Yeah.
So for me, how do I make them feel, this goes back to the word competent, which is one of the lights, right? How do I make them feel more competent in and working with students of all types, all abilities, all gifts? Yeah.
What a wonderful message to be leaving with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it ties in with the universal apostolic preference that Tim mentioned, you know, journeying with the youth in building communities of hope and justice. Yeah, and
this is actually an area that I'm very interested in. It's one that I think there's a lot of room in the JSN to grow. Working with students with any kind of difference. I think we're addressing gender differences, and certainly income differences we've had for a long time, racial, ethnic differences. But this is kind of around the corner, around the bend, in the basement, portable at the end, you have to walk through over the river and through the woods. I think we can do better, better about considering this is inclusive as well, and kind of working towards understanding that inclusiveness includes this. Diversity includes neurodiversity, you know. And so those are the kind of things that I get excited about moving forward, not just for my school, but some other opportunities later on for regional conferences, for the JSN, or those types of things. Yeah, so I get excited. An opportunity like this just fires every neuron in my brain, you know. And my problem is like how to slow myself down. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that, Judy.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the opportunity.